Amara's hands shook as she clutched her bag on her lap, sitting stiffly in the cold, quiet office of Mr. Dlamini, the lawyer. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Across from her, Ziyana, her stepmother, leaned back in her chair with that smug, satisfied smile that always made Amara want to disappear. Maleko, her stepbrother, lounged carelessly, flicking his fingers at the papers on the desk as if he already owned the world. When the lawyer cleared his throat and began reading the will, Amara's stomach twisted. Every word seemed heavier than the last until it finally hit her. Her father had left her $1. Just a single, lonely dollar. Her fingers froze around the strap of her bag. She looked up, eyes wide, trying to process. Meanwhile, Ziyana's smile widened, and Maleko's chest puffed with pride, like hunters who had caught the biggest prey. Whispers started to float around the room. She wasn't loved, someone muttered. Another voice added, no wonder she's always alone. Each word cut into Amara sharper than an. The room felt smaller, suffocating. Every familiar face felt suddenly cold and judgmental. She felt the weight of everyone's eyes, their pity and hidden amusement pressing down on her. Her cheeks burned, tears threatening to spill, but she forced them back. She had lost her father, and now, in the world's eyes, she had nothing. Just $1. And yet, in the pit of her chest, something stubborn refused to break completely. She tucked the coin into her bag, a trembling symbol of humiliation, but also, unknowingly, the beginning of something far bigger than anyone could imagine. The moment the office door opened, Ziyana shoved the single dollar onto the floor at Amara's feet. It bounced once before settling against her shoe. She laughed loudly, a cruel, echoing sound that seemed to follow Amara like a storm cloud. Look at this, Ziyana jeered, her voice dripping with mockery. Your inheritance. $1 whole. Maleko stood beside her, smirking, and added, go buy yourself a meal, little sister. That's all you're worth. The word stung sharper than any slap, and Amara's face burned with humiliation. People walking by had started to gather, drawn by the laughter and commotion. Relatives and neighbors whispered behind hands, their voices low but heavy with judgment. She always was unlucky, one said. Now she'll be poor for life, another muttered. Amara could feel their eyes on her, pity and amusement mingling in a way that made her want to vanish. Every step toward home felt heavier than the last, each one pressing down with the weight of their ridicule. She tucked the dollar into the pocket of her coat, clutching it like a fragile lifeline, though it brought her no comfort. Tears blurred her vision as she walked through the streets of Luanga, passing familiar shops and houses that now felt distant and cold. The wind whipped her hair against her face, but she barely noticed. All she could feel was the emptiness left by her father's absence, the sharp sting of betrayal, and the unrelenting shame of being so publicly dismissed. Every sound, the chatter of neighbors, the footsteps behind her, the mocking laughter of Ziyana and Maleko, seemed to echo in her mind. It wasn't just the dollar. It was the message. She was unwanted, unloved, and insignificant in the eyes of the world she had once trusted. Her heart ached with longing for the warmth of her father, for the comfort that she might have had, and now, with only $1 to her name, it felt as though he had abandoned her too. By the time she reached her small home, her shoulders were stiff, her hands raw from gripping the coin so tightly. She sank onto the doorstep, hiding her face in her hands, sobs shaking her body. $1. One humiliating, meaningless dollar. Yet in that silent, painful moment, a small ember of defiance flickered deep inside her. Even if no one else believed in her, she had to hold on to herself, and somehow, she had to find a way forward. That night, Amara sat on the edge of her small bed, the single dollar still clutched in her trembling hand. The house was quiet, but her mind was a storm of shame, anger, and sadness. She barely noticed her tears drying on her cheeks when her phone rang. The screen showed a number she didn't recognize. Hesitant, she answered. Amara? The voice was calm, familiar, yet serious. This is Mr. Dlamini, your father's lawyer. Her heart skipped a beat. She had almost forgotten the man who had read her father's will earlier that day. Yes, hello, she whispered, her voice shaky. I need to speak to you about your father's instructions. He left something for you, something private. No one else knows about it. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning, but you must tell no one. Not Ziyana, not Maleko, not even your neighbors. Amara froze, staring at the dollar in her hand as if it had suddenly grown heavy with meaning. Something for me? But he left me only this. Her voice cracked. Yes, Mr. Dlamini said gently. Your father planned this. He knew how things would appear in public. You must trust me. The line went quiet, and Amara sank onto her bed, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline. Her mind raced. Was her father hiding something from Ziyana and Maleko? Could he have left her something more? And if so, why had he made it seem like she got nothing? A small spark of hope flickered in her chest, tiny but fierce. At the same time, fear crept in. What if it was a trick? What if this was just another cruel game? Could she trust anyone in a family that had laughed at her, mocked her, and thrown a single dollar at her feet? She hugged the coin tightly, feeling the sting of betrayal still fresh. Sleep was impossible that night. She lay staring at the ceiling, imagining a secret hidden just for her, a part of her father's love that Ziyana and Maleko could never touch. Her heart thumped with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Tomorrow she would find out. Tomorrow, she would learn if her father had really left her nothing, or if the world had been fooled, and she was meant to inherit far more than anyone had ever imagined. By the time the moon had moved across the sky, Amara felt a strange mix of nerves and determination. She whispered to herself, gripping the dollar and the hope that had taken root. I have to see this through. I have to believe in him, in me. And with that, she finally drifted into a restless, dream-filled sleep, the promise of tomorrow weighing heavily and thrillingly on her mind. The next morning, Amara's hands were still trembling as she followed Mr. Dlamini through the quiet streets of Lawang. Her mind raced with questions and doubts. What could possibly be waiting for her after the shame of yesterday? Every step toward the lawyer's office felt like walking into a dream she wasn't sure she deserved. Once inside, Mr. Dlamini led her down a narrow corridor and unlocked a heavy metal door. Behind it was a small, hidden room filled with safe deposit boxes. Amara's eyes widened in disbelief as the lawyer pulled a key from his pocket. This one is yours, he said, unlocking a box labeled with her initials. Inside, the box was filled with documents, contracts, and folders, more than she had ever seen in her life. She picked up the first folder and gasped. It was a deed to a vast piece of land outside Cambiri. Another folder revealed shares in companies, bank accounts with numbers she could hardly comprehend, all under her name. Her fingers shook as she touched the papers, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then she noticed an envelope, sealed with her father's handwriting. With trembling hands, she opened it and read his words aloud, tears spilling over. I left you $1 in public so the greedy would fight over nothing. The real empire is yours. Her knees gave out, and she sank onto the floor, clutching the letter to her chest. All the anger, shame, and fear of yesterday came crashing down, replaced by an overwhelming wave of love and gratitude. Her father had thought of everything. He had known Ziyana and Maleko would be greedy, and he had protected her from their cruelty in the only way he could. Amara cried like she hadn't cried in years, letting the tears wash over her face, feeling both sorrow and joy at the same time. She realized then, fully and deeply, that her father had loved her more than anyone could have imagined. He had left her not just money or property, but a future, an entire world built for her, hidden until the right moment. She looked at the documents again, feeling a strange mixture of disbelief and empowerment. Everything she had been mocked for, everything she had been told was worthless, was now hers. The shame of yesterday faded, replaced by a fierce determination. She would honor her father's love, and she would make sure it counted for more than just herself. For the first time since the will reading, Amara smiled through her tears. The empire her father had quietly built for her was more than money or land. It was proof that love could outsmart greed, that patience could triumph over cruelty. And now, for the first time, she understood. Her father had never abandoned her. He had been protecting her all along. Amara's heart raced as Mr. Dlamini handed her a folder labeled property. She flipped through the pages, scanning the addresses, and then froze. There it was, a massive mansion on the oceanfront in Cambiri. Her breath caught. She remembered Ziyana, her stepmother, talking about it so many times, her voice full of longing. One day, this will be mine. Amara's lips pressed together, a mix of shock and disbelief flooding her. The very place Ziyana had dreamed of was now hers. The next day, she drove to Cambiri, the ocean sparkling in the distance. As she approached the mansion, the sight of it stole her breath. The gates were tall and elegant, the driveway wide and lined with palm. The house itself seemed to rise out of the coastline, with grand windows that reflected the sun and terraces that overlooked the endless blue sea. Amara's hands shook as she stepped out of the car, unable to believe this was real. Every detail, the sweeping staircase, the marble floors, the balconies that seemed to touch the sky, made her feel like she had stepped into a dream she had never dared to imagine. She wandered through the rooms slowly, running her fingers over polished surfaces, touching walls that had been designed with such care. Each corner revealed more beauty, a library filled with sunlight, a kitchen so large it could fit a small party, and bedrooms that looked out over the waves. She could hear the ocean in every room, a constant, calming presence that made her chest tighten with emotion. As she stood on the balcony, feeling the breeze and watching the waves crash against the rocks below, memories of Ziyana's words came rushing back. All those times Ziyana had gloated about owning something she had never even had yet, it was as if life itself was mocking her stepmother now. Amara allowed herself a small, quiet smile, not out of cruelty, but out of the sheer irony of the moment. Fate had turned the tables. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just from the beauty of the mansion, but from the understanding of her father's plan. He had seen through the greed and selfishness of her stepfamily, and he had ensured that Amara, his daughter, was the one to inherit what truly mattered. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and love, not just for the wealth, but for the thoughtfulness, care, and protection her father had woven into every step of his plan. Standing there, looking out at the endless horizon, Amara realized that this mansion was more than just a house. It was a symbol of her father's love, her own resilience, and the start of a future she could shape entirely on her own. For the first time since the will reading, she felt a surge of power and hope. This was her moment, her life, and she was ready to embrace it fully. Ziyana paced back and forth in her luxurious living room, her hands trembling with excitement and greed. Maleko sat on the sofa, tapping his fingers impatiently. They had both been certain that the will had left them everything: lands, bank accounts, property. They could already imagine the life they would live: endless wealth, power, and admiration. But their confidence would soon turn to shock. It started with the bank statements. Ziyana had called their banks to transfer the money, expecting to see the large sums her father had supposedly left her. Instead, the accounts were empty. Every single one. She stared at the numbers, her jaw dropping. This isn't possible," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Maleko grabbed the phone, checking himself. His eyes widened, and a vein throbbed on his forehead. Nothing at all," he roared, slamming the table. Without waiting a second longer, they stormed into Mr. Dlamini's office, their faces red with fury. Ziyana's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she demanded, "Explain this. We were supposed to get everything. Where is it?" Maleko's voice shook with rage. "This is fraud. Someone is trying to steal from us. We will sue." Mr. Dlamini remained calm, folding his hands on the desk. "Everything was left to Amara," he said firmly, his voice echoing in the tense silence. "You received nothing. Every property, every account, every asset belongs to her alone." Ziyana's face went pale. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, fainting as the shock overwhelmed her. Maleko stepped forward, his fists clenched, his anger boiling over. "This isn't fair. This isn't legal. She can't take everything," he shouted, but Mr. Dlamini's expression did not change. "You have no legal claim," he said. "Your father made his intentions very clear. Every single thing was meant for Amara." Maleko's hands shook as he realized there was no proof, no loophole, nothing to fight with. Every plan, every expectation of wealth, had been completely shattered. Anger and frustration surged through him, but it hit him that nothing could change the reality. He was powerless, just as Ziyana had been moments before. Outside the office, the weight of their own greed pressed down on them. They had laughed at Amara, mocked her, and humiliated her, believing she was worthless. Now every dollar, every mansion, every piece of land they had assumed would be theirs had vanished into the hands of the very person they had scorned. Humiliation now turned on them, sharp and bitter. Meanwhile, Amara, far away, was unaware of the chaos behind closed doors. She was stepping into her new life, filled with hope, possibility, and the kind of quiet power that only comes from being truly prepared. The downfall of Ziyana and Maleko was already in motion, and the tables had turned completely. Greed, it seemed, had a way of punishing itself, and the ones who thought they had won were about to learn that lesson the hardest way possible. Amara could have shouted, laughed, or shown Ziyana and Maleko the pain they had caused, but she didn't. She stayed calm, letting the world see only her quiet confidence. There was no need for public humiliation. She had something far more powerful than anger or revenge. She had the ability to build a life they could never take from her. Instead, she took action in ways that mattered. She remembered Ziyana's workers, many of whom had been treated poorly, ignored, or even insulted when they did their job. She offered them positions in her own businesses, treating them with respect, fairness, and kindness. Word spread quickly through Luanga. People who had once been overlooked or mistreated found themselves working in safe, well-paid jobs, proud to be part of something meaningful. Maleko, meanwhile, had always enjoyed belittling young employees in his ventures. Amara reached out to them too, giving opportunities to those he had once scorned. She trained, encouraged, and supported them, and soon a loyal, dedicated team was helping her businesses grow stronger by the day. She never flaunted her success, but it became clear. Amara's empire was rising while her step-family's influence was fading. Ziyana and Maleko watched helplessly from their small home, struggling to maintain even the life they had taken for granted. Their businesses, once thought secure, faltered under poor management and the absence of loyal workers. The community, once eager to gossip about Amara's supposed failure, now whispered about her in admiration. She had turned pain into purpose, and every new venture strengthened her position in Luanga. Amara felt a quiet satisfaction, but it wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice and balance. Every business that flourished, every employee who smiled because of her, was a reminder that kindness, strategy, and hard work always outlast greed and cruelty. Ziyana and Maleko had chosen arrogance and mockery, and now the consequences were unfolding naturally. Each day, as her shops opened, her employees greeted her warmly, and the community began to trust her vision. Slowly, Luanga saw her not just as the girl who once inherited $1, but as a leader, someone who could turn humiliation into strength. Meanwhile, Ziyana and Maleko struggled with empty bank accounts and failing businesses, their former confidence replaced with desperation. Amara never celebrated their failures. She simply focused on building her own path, proving that real power comes not from cruelty or loud threats, but from quiet, relentless effort. Her revenge wasn't dramatic. It was slow, steady, and undeniable. Luanga watched in awe as the girl they had once pitted transformed into a force of respect and inspiration, while those who had tried to crush her learned that true strength always rises above. In every small victory, Amara felt the weight of her father's love guiding her. He had given her more than property. He had given her the wisdom to rise above hatred and the courage to let life itself deliver the consequences of greed. And rise she did, one step at a time. The village was buzzing with excitement that afternoon. People had gathered for a community celebration, children ran around laughing, and the scent of grilled food filled the air. Amara walked through the crowd, calm and composed, her presence quietly commanding attention. She noticed familiar faces greeting her warmly, their smiles full of respect and admiration. From across the square, Ziyana spotted her. She straightened her dress, plastered a polite smile on her face, and began walking toward Amara, acting as though nothing had happened. Maleko lingered behind, frowning and shifting from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. Ziyana's steps were careful, deliberate, as if she could charm her way back into favor. Amara's heart didn't race. Instead, a quiet strength settled over her. She had no intention of letting Ziyana manipulate the situation. As Ziyana reached her, she put on a sweet, practiced voice. "Amara, my dear, I just wanted to say." But Amara didn't let her finish. She looked her stepmother in the eyes, her voice calm but sharp, carrying across the gathering. "You laughed when I was given $1. Today, you beg from the daughter you called worthless." The words hung in the air. For a moment, the noise of the festival seemed to vanish. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned to look, some whispering to each other, eyes wide with shock and curiosity. Ziyana's smile faltered, and her face drained of color. The laughter, the mockery, the pride she had carried all these years crumbled in an instant. She lowered her head, unable to meet anyone's gaze, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. Maleko stepped forward, opening his mouth to argue, but the truth in Amara's words silenced him. Around them, the villagers murmured, some nodding in approval, others shaking their heads in disbelief at the turn of events. Amara stood tall, her own chest steady, radiating quiet authority. She didn't shout, she didn't gloat. Her power came from the simple fact that she had risen above cruelty, humiliation, and the contrast between her calm strength and Ziyana's faltering composure was stark, and everyone could see it. As Ziyana shuffled away, her pride shattered, Amara felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. She had confronted her past without lowering herself to their level. The crowd continued to whisper, many coming forward to congratulate her quietly, showing respect not just for her wealth, but for her character. In that moment, Amara realized something important. Revenge didn't need to be loud or cruel. It could be simple, direct, and powerful. One line, one truth, spoken at the right moment, could undo years of arrogance and mockery. And for the first time in a long while, she felt completely free of the shame that had haunted her since the day of the will reading. She had claimed her dignity, and the world had noticed. Amara stood at the edge of her new office, looking out over the streets of Kambiri. The sun was rising, painting the city in gold, and for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of possibility rather than shame. The girl who had once received a single dollar was now in charge of an empire her father had left her, a chance not just to live, but to make a difference. She started small, focusing on what the community needed most. Schools for children who had no access to education, hospitals for those who could not afford care, and businesses that offered fair jobs to anyone willing to work. Every decision was guided by fairness, respect, and the memory of the struggles she had faced. Slowly, her projects began to take shape. Laughter returned to the classrooms, patients found care and comfort in the hospitals, and her businesses became known for treating workers with dignity. Word of her success spread through Kambiri. People whispered her name in awe. Amara, the girl who rose from nothing, they said. Young women, in particular, looked to her as a symbol of strength. If Amara could rise from $1, they whispered among themselves, so can we. Her story became more than wealth. It became hope, proof that betrayal and cruelty could not stop someone determined to succeed. Even those who had mocked her could not deny her accomplishments. While Ziyana and Maleko struggled to maintain even the smallest businesses, Amara's empire expanded steadily. She stayed humble, never flaunting her success in a cruel way, but letting her work speak for itself. People admired her for her fairness, her patience, and her ability to turn pain into progress. Amara herself felt a sense of deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with money. Every school she opened, every hospital wing completed, every small business thriving in Kambiri was a reminder that her father had believed in her when the world had not. She worked tirelessly, meeting with employees, reviewing plans, and ensuring that every decision would leave a lasting impact. With each passing day, her reputation grew. She was no longer just the girl who had inherited $1. She was a leader, a mentor, and an inspiration. Her life proved that destiny was not determined by cruelty or circumstance, but by courage, intelligence, and perseverance. Standing in front of a newly completed school one afternoon, Amara smiled as children ran toward the gates, eager to learn. She thought back to the day of the will, to the shame and humiliation, and she realized just how far she had come. Betrayal had not stopped her. Poverty had not defeated her. And the girl who once clutched a single dollar in despair had risen into a woman whose name would be remembered, whose legacy would inspire generations. Amara had not just survived, she had thrived. And in doing so, she had shown the entire world what it meant to rise above, to turn pain into power, and to let love and determination guide the way. The night air was warm and full of laughter as Amara walked through her mansion, now sparkling with lights and decorated for a charity gala. The gardens were alive with music, and the smell of delicious food filled the air. Guests mingled, chatting excitedly about the schools, hospitals, and businesses she had built across Kambiri. Everywhere she looked, there were smiles, admiration, and respect. Outside the gates, Ziyana and Maleko stood in the shadows, their faces pale and tight with frustration. No matter how they pleaded or gestured, the guards would not let them in. They watched helplessly as the world they had once mocked Amara for being excluded from opened its doors to her. She had built a life of influence, kindness, and prosperity, and they were left on the outside, powerless and forgotten. Inside, the crowd raised their glasses in unison. To Amara, they toasted. She turned $1 into a kingdom. The words echoed through the mansion, and Amara felt a warm rush of pride and gratitude. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about the lives she had touched, the opportunities she had created, and the hope she had inspired in countless people. She paused for a moment, looking out over the terrace toward the moonlit ocean. Her father's vision had worked perfectly. The love he had shown, even in ways that had seemed confusing or unfair at first, had built something far stronger than greed or cruelty. Every project, every smile, every life improved was proof of that. Amara smiled to herself, a quiet, satisfied smile. The humiliation of the past, the betrayal, the heartbreak, all of it had led her here. She had turned a single dollar into not just wealth, but a legacy that would live forever. Love, patience, and courage had built an empire no one could take away, and Amara knew, with all her heart, that this was only the beginning.